got no gas in it.
Radio Free Intimate episode 293, baby. So the other day, somebody asked me, hey, Jub, what's your favorite Hellenic black metal band? And I kind of went into the standard big time poser. There's just so many good ones.
Jeez, dude.
It's so hard to pick one, you know? But I swear I wasn't actually trying to impress anybody with that. Because I know a lot of people, you ask them questions like that, they give you sort of a wishy-washy answer to get out of taking a stand on anything. But for me, Greek black metal really is some of like the best stuff out there. And there is so much of it that's really, really good. And I got to thinking, what would I consider my favorite? And then I realized, much like the band Dissection from Sweden, the band we're covering this week doesn't necessarily jump to the front of my mind as one of my favorite bands in the same way something like Dark Throne or Seikimatsu or Morbid Angel or does. But every time I need to load music on something, like the first few albums I put on there are always going to be The Somber Lane, Storm of the Lights Bane, and then the first three albums from the band we're covering this week: Thy Mighty Contract, Non-Serviam, Triarchy the Lost Lovers. Because we're talking about that band that's got the name you definitely don't want to say in front of your
elderly 92-year-old granny.
Rotting Christ, who through much introspection and looking at actual play counts on all my devices and how long I've owned the CDs and how scuffed up they are, may in fact just be the best Hellenic black metal band. And honestly, if you ask me, they might also be the most underrated.
어플로 주문을 하던가?
Okay, look, I get it.
I know what you're thinking.
Rotting Christ is by far the most monetarily successful and well-known band of the early Hellenic black metal scene. How the fuck are they underrated? But I'm not talking about that sort of stuff. I'm talking about their appraisal amongst the core black metal fan base, like the real diehards. You ask any of them, hey, what's the best Greek black metal band? They're always gonna tell you, what?
안 하더라고요.
That's right, Verithron. It's always Verithron. And look, I get it. In terms of the amount of albums I like from the band, if we're using that as the only metric, Verithron is the better band for me because I like pretty much all of their albums.
너는 산이야 바다야?
Yes, even Crow's Reign. Haters gonna hate. But those Rotting Christ albums that I do like, they're on another level. I like the best of Rotting Christ more than I like the best of Verithron.
Take care, Arbiter. What you say is heresy.
I mean, look, they're both great bands. Way better than anything you're probably listening to right now.
Damn, that's hateful!
And interestingly enough, they've had a decent amount of crossover with each other over the years. Most notably, Rotting Christ guitarist Sakis actually guest wrote a song for Verithron way back in 1993 entitled The Mystic Papyrus, which you can find as a bonus track on just about all of their demo compilations. It starts out really groovy and very thrash influenced in the classic Verithron mode before Sakis himself busts in and starts adding in some very Rotting Christ sounding, sorrowful, melodic lead guitar. If you haven't heard this song before and you're a Verithron fan, you're really missing out. Go check that shit. And that's not even the only time Sakis guested with Verithron. Way back on their first album, the song Lustful Father, one of the best songs on the album, is all Sakis playing guitar. And wouldn't you know it, it's by far the most Rotting Christ sounding song on the album. This very aggressive, very heavy metal style melodic riff, utilizing a lot of Sakis' signature guitar tricks with the artificial harmonics and the string bend. Also, the bassist on this album, Jim Mutilator, was actually the founding member of Rotting Christ, way back when they were called Black Church in 1984. And he helped out the main songwriter on the album, who of course was Archon Vorskoth of Zemiel. I mean, actually, come to think of it, if you were really to put a gun to my head and ask you what my favorite Hellenic black metal band was, and I had to be perfectly honest, I'd probably say Zemiel, mostly because they got that part that goes like... Not to mention that other part that goes like... Unless we forget, they also had that part way back when it goes a little something like... I don't know, maybe I just listen to too much Sabbath and Bulldozer nowadays. But that's kind of where my tastes are at. Zemiel, great fucking band, but I already covered them way back on episode 87, 4 years ago, so can't do another one on Zemiel. Oh well! Maybe if the full-length version of The Slay with Silent Dagger ever comes out, they can make it into another black metal catch-up episode or something. But getting back into Rotting Christ, that name that you definitely don't want to say in front of your...
elderly 92-year-old granny.
What's the deal with that anyways? Because you remember back when I was playing those Verithron songs that I said sounded very much like Rotting Christ? That band name's brutal as fuck.
Yeah, buddy.
I actually love it. Definitely keeps the posers away. But I can admit it doesn't really seem to fit with the melancholic nature of those songs I was playing. It's way more in your face. Well, this is because that name is a relic of an abrupt stylistic change that happened way back in 1987. You had this very early Greek metal band called Black Church, founded by Jim Mutilator. But when the brothers Sakis and Tamis Tolis joined, they changed the name to Rotting Christ and switched their style to more of almost kind of a grindcore thing. Now, if you're a big-time poser dickhead, you might accuse Rotting Christ of selling out, given that later on they changed from grindcore to black metal, much like you might accuse Darkthrone of selling out because they changed from death metal to black metal. However, much like with Darkthrone's Soulside Journey album, despite it being a death metal album, it has a whole lot of like black metal, occult sort of melody to it. Rotting Christ's grindcore material from their early days honestly contains a whole lot of the black metal elements they expand upon on their later stuff, just in a much more nascent, primitive form. Like this riff right here, it's definitely grindcore, but it's also pretty darn close to something like Mayhem's Death Crush, and they're also rather fond of dropping in these slower, doomier bits to kind of shift up the atmosphere in the middle of a lot of these songs. For something that a lot of people described as noise grind, this shit seems pretty memorable and very melodic to me. And with a cool sort of little weird bass fill thing, they're gonna jump back into the grindcore stuff, of course. That's from early in 1989. Later on in 1989 is when they put out their first demo that was like straight up pure black metal called Satanas Te Deum. This one also contains even more hints as to where they were gonna go with their sound later on. You can see they fully embraced the doomy parts that they included in their earlier grindcore material to sort of form the backbone of their sound going forward, whilst also adding a whole lot of melancholy to the proceedings, namely in a very ahead of its time element of keyboards. That melody right there, that's pure Rotting Christ goodness, and it's happening way back in 1989. For whatever reason, it seems like even a lot of diehards out there haven't really checked out the Rotting Christ demos, which is a damn shame because both in their grindcore form and in this more doomy black metal form, I think they're pretty spectacular, especially for the year that they came out. I mean, these are like old, and they still hold up. In fact, I enjoy these demos more than some of their pre-album singles like Apocalypthiosis or Dawn of the Iconoclast.
What you say is heresy.
But for me, the true birth of the Rotting Christ sound occurs on 1991's Passage to Arcturo EP, what I would call the first unassailable Rotting Christ classic, which features again them leaning even more hard into that doom metal sound, but also incorporating a whole lot of thrash, which has been sort of an undersung element of classic Rotting Christ material. I think there's a pretty potent thrash influence, in addition to all of the melancholic keyboard and guitar work. Production on this album is also, if you ask me, the best they ever had. Really good instrumental separation. Honestly, sounds better than a lot of their full lengths, particularly in the drum department. Those really cavernous snares and kick drums enhance the sepulchral atmosphere mightily. But speaking of that thrash influence, check out this bit. Really cool songwriting here with the sort of introductory transition section, before then jumping back into a reinterpretation of the opening doomy riff in sort of a more mid-paced black metal, thrash metal kind of context. Really dig those keyboard accents too. Those real heavy palm mutes, it almost sounds like a much heavier version of a Manowar riff or something. Depending on when you asked me, I might actually say Passage to Arcturo is my favorite Rotting Christ release. But if you were to put a gun to my head right now, ask me what the best Rotting Christ album is, honestly, I'd probably go with their first full-length Thy Mighty Contract. Yeah, lame elitist likes the first album best, details at 11, whatever.
We'll do it live! Fuck it!
What really sticks out to me about this album is how well structured it is as a whole. The songs all flow into each other, kind of telling this continuous story. And it seems like they paid a lot of attention to where each song goes on the album's track list in terms of the overall narrative. For instance, the first song starts out very hostile and aggressive sounding with this super scratchy sounding riff, some nasty kind of hissy vocals, before then gradually bringing in these ever more consonant sounding melodic guitar riffs, gradually turning up the melancholy knob and sort of crossfading it with that kind of black metal unholiness. It's like they're easing fans of their demo era material into the new Rotting Christ sound. Further on in the song, they start including more percussive riffs that kind of have those thrashy, sort of palm-muted turnarounds to them. I also really like the double overlaid vocals here, sort of doing a Greek black metal Glenn Benton thing. The additional vocals also actually the guy from fucking Necromantia, whose style bounces off of Sakis's really well. But now that they've eased you into the new Rotting Christ sound, they go full bore melody right from the beginning of the second track, which hits you with this gigantic melody right out of the gate that is not only beautiful but also helps to color the rest of the song's composition, meaning that you can hear echoes of that initial riff in almost every other musical phrase in the song. For instance, this bit right here is clearly sort of a melodic counterpoint to that initial riff, as is the more subdued transition that comes afterwards, where you can tell that they're really building up to another major explosion of more tremolo-picked melody this time around, complete with the inclusion of a high-energy guitar lead, as well as what I like to call the Burzum drum beat. You see how all the parts logically flow into each other? Well, here's another one, sort of a little miniature thrash break that still maintains that high level of consonant melody that's been a major fixture of this track. We played depressive black thrash around here, folks, and another sort of tremolo-picked melodic transition. This one a whole lot darker sounding, maybe the darkest riff on the album, and yet still maintains something of the melodic character of that initial riff that started the song off. These songs are all just constructed in this constantly flowing manner. They earn their longer running times by feeling very cohesive. So here's a cool little 80s thrash metal style mini solo that does a more than adequate job of leading us back into that riff that started the song off. So that sort of 1-2 punch of moving out of very angry sounding black metal into more melancholic stuff. Great way to start the album. They follow that up by leaning even more heavily into the thrashy sort of groove that kind of helps set them apart from even other Greek bands. Up next, Jesus Christ, we're that far in? Damn, okay. Rest assured, the rest of this album is also amazing, but we got at least 2 more full lengths to cover. So moving on to Non-Serviam it is. This was the first Rotting Christ album I listened to in its entirety after hearing Kronos when I was very early on in getting into black metal, and yeah, for a long time this one was my favorite too. I actually did a pretty thorough examination of the title track on this album about 4 years ago on episode 80 about Moon Sorrow, since they covered it. In the interest of time, just go listen to that one if you want to hear my thoughts on that song. It's pretty much a perfect black metal song, but the one that really made me sit up and take notice of Rotting Christ initially was the second track on Non-Serviam, that being Wolfera the Jackal, which opens with this absolutely beautiful melodic riff. At the time, the only other melodic black metal band I really knew was Dissection. I didn't even know anybody else did stuff like this. And then I hear Rotting Christ had been doing it for even longer than Dissection had. They quickly became one of my favorite black metal bands as a teenager, and they've remained a constant fixture of my music listening pretty much ever since. I mean, just listen to that riff, dude. That is perfect stuff. And I love how cloudy and mysterious that guitar sound is. Really dig the production on this album apart from the mechanical drums. Keyboards this time around are great too. They're not quite a stereotypical symphonic black metal band, but they do use synthesized keyboards better than almost any other band I've heard in the genre. Here's another one of those great sort of transition sections that so colored the musical experience of the first album, moving into a short reimagining of that opening main riff before going into this more epic sounding section. Very mystical sounding, but also rather martial. Check out these timpanis. And another really cool solo from Sakis, who isn't really a shredder. He has more of this like bluesy, sort of emotive feel to his guitar playing. Hits the rest of the music perfectly. Speaking of which, an uncharacteristically hostile and dark tremolo-picked riff from Rotting Christ. I mean, you gotta be just a little bit nasty sounding if you want to use that as your band name, right?
That's right!
Thanks, fellas. Appreciate the support. This song's 7 minutes long and it never gets boring because much like their debut album, all the parts flow into each other very logically and all the riffs are incredibly memorable. This would continue to be the case for the third Rotting Christ album, Triarchy the Lost Lovers, which shamefully I was a little bit late in getting into, mostly because, like I said, Rotting Christ was a band that I got really heavily into when I was a teenager. At the time, I was reading a whole lot of Brett Stevens, and he didn't really like this album, and I hadn't quite realized the degree to which he was a nerd yet, so I kind of ignored it back in the day and didn't really get around to giving it an honest chance until maybe around like 2015, 2016-ish. Don't make the same mistake I did. Triarchy the Lost Lovers, banger of an album. Notably, they finally got a good drum sound again for the first time since friggin' Passage to Arcturo for the first time in half a decade. Musically, however, this very much picks up where Non-Serviam left off. It's maybe a little bit more heavy metal influenced than that album was, but heavy metal's always been an important part of Rotting Christ's sound anyways. Definitely not a sellout album. Also, this harmony right here, that's that good stuff. If you don't like this, I don't know what to tell you.
Get out of here.
This is what Greek black metal is supposed to sound like at its best, and the bridge section of this song is even better. Check out these tremolo pick guitar riffs, leading into another great standout melody right about here. Good stuff. And they bring back more of that epic martial sound that showed up all over non-Serviam, utilizing those timpanis again to great effect, leading us into another one of their trademark sort of melancholic melodic mutations of a thrash break, complete with really cool harmonized melodies that also hint back at the opening riffs of the song. Like I said, those first 3 Rotting Christ albums, all thoroughly well composed, very organic sounding, great stuff. Everything that came out after that, I don't really give a shit.
Oh, damn. Yeah, I'm a dick. I'm sorry.
For one, they succumbed to a trend that dogged a lot of later Greek black metal, where they went from having some of the best album covers around to having these absolutely disgusting pieces of CGI dog shit that I really just can't stand to look at.
Nice fucking model!
But more importantly than that, they kind of pulled a later Cataclysm and sort of turned into, I don't know what to call it, festival extreme metal. Give an example, the really epic part on the title track of Non-Serviam goes a little bit something like this. Here's how they do that sort of thing live nowadays. Yeah, that sort of thing just isn't for me, and it really colors a lot of their later output. That said, they're still really good musicians. Sakis is still a great guitar player, and he does do some pretty cool stuff, even on the newer albums. Like on A Dead Poem, he does some really cool shit with natural harmonics, and on Kronos he goes all crazy, using the wah pedal and tremolo picking to do some really cool kind of ambient shit, wrapping its way around the main sort of chugging riffs. That's pretty neat stuff. So even if I'm not that down with the style of later Rotting Christ, I wouldn't say they've completely posed out. They still keep it relatively black metal, and they're still involved in the black metal scene. Like, within the past few years, they've even done a split 7-inch with fucking Verithron. You don't see Behemoth doing new splits with, like, Graveland.
I keep it real!
So overall, I'd say Rotting Christ still a pretty cool fucking band, and those first 3 albums are amazing, even if you definitely shouldn't say the name of this band in front of your
elderly 92-year-old granny.
Thank you for your patronage. Bye.